Hello and welcome to Spaced Out. My guest, Robert Jacobson, is a partner of Space Advisors, and he's also a space expert and the author of Space is Open for Business, which I've been reading for the past 2 weeks. I'm still not finished yet, but it is so enthralling and interesting. So, Robert, welcome from LA. You're joining us from LA today. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much, Sarah. Great to speak today.
Awesome. So, with you, I wanted to discuss the future of humanity in space. That's something that you mentioned so many times in your book, in terms of the developments taking place, the things that we should be thinking about, and how that can benefit us on Earth. So, what are the things that you think are most essential for people to think about and invest in, so that we can focus our efforts in those areas?
It's in really the why. It's first of all, we have numerous pressing challenges here on planet Earth, and I didn't want to discount any of those. But what a lot of people may not realize is that many answers that we already get from that help us here in our daily lives sometimes have an origin from space. We're still getting benefits from like the Apollo program that was, many decades ago, and our society still benefits from that. And particularly the U.S. Space Agency, NASA, does an excellent job regarding spin-offs of technology that is developed internally at NASA. They have an entire publication called Spin-Off, where you can read about the hundreds of, actually thousands of different technologies that are affecting our daily lives in many visible and invisible ways. And I contend that this new interest and growth in this space sector, this new space, some people call it space renaissance, space 2.0, space 3.0, that it really can benefit humanity in a multitude of ways, and it could be a multi-generational effort and could help us solve some of our greatest challenges that we're experiencing here on Earth.
So, what are those challenges, and in what ways are those challenges being explored?
One major one is around the environment and how it is changing due to human activities here on Earth. You can call it global climate change, global warming, whatever moniker you want to give it. But some of the earliest kind of measurements and readings of that was from space assets, from satellites in space. And we know that we still need to do better monitoring of different types of emissions, vehicular traffic, deforestation, illegal fishing. There's many other kind of ancillary activities affecting the environment, might not be as directly related to climate change, but all still very relevant to kind of how we're going to thrive and hopefully as a species here on planet Earth. And that requires having space assets to be able to monitor that. But I also sort of contend that there are we're just kind of this infancy in learning how to make things and manufacture things in space. And they might include new materials, new medicines, and there's even groups that are looking at how you could take energy from space and more efficiently use the energy from the sun and use that to both power the satellites in space, and potentially even send some of that energy back to Earth. So it's a concept called space-based solar power. In some ways, it's kind of controversial because it's not in practice yet. It's still kind of a theoretical thing, but you have the U.S. government through the Air Force has been recently studying it, and they have an experiment on a spacecraft looking at kind of the technical feasibility of it. But these are the types of ideas that I think will hopefully inspire and help create new innovations, because we really do need more energy here on planet Earth for kind of our growing civilization. But it many times is at odds with kind of our natural state.
So how will that be managed in an ethical and sustainable way?
In what part? The energy production?
Yeah, space-based solar power.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be like if you had a solar farm in space, which would be a tremendously probably large infrastructure project. You know, you might be building you might be building the solar cells in space. You might not necessarily be bringing them up from Earth into space. You might just be manufacturing. It might be more cost efficient just to build them in space. Um, you could provide, I mean, low cost energy to different places or around the world. So it could be, you know, hugely disruptive. It would be like, you need energy, this place in the desert or a place in a forest or somewhere where maybe there's not a lot of access, say, no telephone lines, no oil refineries. You might just literally be able to beam the energy down. And that's a kind of a powerful idea. So I think you know I think in terms of how you would distribute that, I think it could be kind of freely distributed. You could probably give countries that don't have good access to energy this access. But then this is kind of pretty long ways off. Some have suspected, even with low cost access to space, this could be minimum of at least 20 years from now, too, you would even see some type of pilot project and nothing at scale being developed. But it's a promising idea. But in the interim, one area that is getting some interest is new forms of nuclear technology. And I think it's for the first time in recent years, the US is actually looking at some new nuclear technology for space. Maybe some of it could have a spin-off for use on the Earth. I haven't studied that closely.
That's really interesting. You talk about the solar farms being built in space. Does that mean people will be working in space? The jobs will be created specifically positioned in space?
I mean, it could be. I think there'll always be a certain amount of, space is dangerous and robotics are going to probably forever be a part of the space sector. And humans we're fragile, we're kind of squishy. And, so maybe instead of requiring, thousands of people to do this job, maybe it's people helping service the robots that are building these and overseeing and, the development of this. So I certainly think, we would see, space-based engineers, space-based technicians, space-based manufacturers. So I do think there will be new jobs, new careers, new roles created. What scale and to what speed, I'm not clear. But I think some enabling factors are you have these new large launch space infrastructure being developed, and specifically talking about like SpaceX's Starlink, eventually Blue Origin's New Glenn when that becomes available, and not that Starship is operational yet, but they are doing tests on it. But if it becomes available in the next few years, and it really does radically decrease the cost of getting, they're talking about I think 100 plus metric tons to orbit for a very relatively low cost, then you can do all sorts of interesting things. You could deploy things that are already built on the ground, put them to space, or you could just get lots of your parts and supplies up there for assembly and manufacture in space. It will allow a lot more choice in terms of the kind of the diversity of activity that humans will be participating in.
That's really interesting, and it sounds ideal, but it also seems far off. I mean, you mention in the book, to quote, collaboration within and outside of the space sector is crucial to innovation, especially because addressing the complex challenges that exist in space often requires multiple areas of expertise. So to make that happen faster, how can and will the industry diversify, and why will this be a strength to its development?
Well, collaboration, is something that humans can actually do. Not every creature has that ability to cooperate and collaborate and to negotiate. We have that ability, but we're also very stubborn we're a stubborn species. You just think you might be able to cooperate with a friend, a business colleague, and then negotiating with like a child. And many times I feel that our species is still like very childlike, that we're, and not to diminish where anyone is in their own development, but I sometimes feel like we're still toddlers. We had these fits and outbursts, and we can be very emotional for no reason whatsoever, just kind of make these outbursts. And I sense that our species, the humanity, would be better trying to understand what the other side wants, what's their goal,
Yeah.
and then starting from there, going, okay, if this is your goal, where can we go backwards to try to find the places that we can have mutual common reference points to. And some might say, well, no, we might have there might be another country, another nation state that we don't have any common goals. I find that, or common points of interest, I find that a little difficult to believe. I think if we just require some patience.
Do you think diplomacy can be taught within business structures?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of negotiation. Part of diplomacy is negotiation, and in terms of like space, the U.S. uses space in some ways as a soft form of diplomacy. We have the International Space Station, and which involves Japanese, European Union, Russia, who are all participating, and other countries in various ways participating in the space station, and they have to cooperate every day of the year to keep those astronauts alive. And then in other ways, the U.S. government owns and operates weather satellites, and they provide weather data to other countries at no charge, and that's a form of soft diplomacy. So I think, yeah, there's ways that businesses have to navigate within their own sort of the rules of their country, but I think hopefully as the space frontier opens up, it's not just a complete winner takes all, or kind of completely cavalier attitude in terms of as we move out, but there is understanding that these early commercial activities could potentially affect how we're this operating regime for a very long time, or could set precedents. So I think businesses and need to take
individuals.
Individuals,
but I think have the responsibility to be psychologically aware, to have self-awareness and aware of how their decisions or actions impact. It could be business or personal relationships, and quite often everything is a relationship. The occurrence of anything, when you collaborate, whichever relationship you have, that relationship creates an outcome, a result. And so you within yourself, I feel, have to be quite wholesome. So when you're working with someone, everything that you do comes from a place of balance, and that affects business, I feel. What do you think about that?
Oh, I agree. I mean, and I think these things can be learned, later in life. But there is it's a reasonable assumption that many technology developers that have come out of places like, say, in the proverbial Silicon Valley, sometimes you have people that are very exceptionally skilled in a few very specific areas, like brilliant in what they do. But in areas around their emotional intelligence, sometimes they could use a lot more improvements there. And sometimes that results in, like, you see things on, like, behavior that they'll publicly post on their social media, how they've treated employees. Sometimes it's with spouses and girlfriends. You hear about these things, So, and I don't want to like belabor this too much, but I do think emotional intelligence is something that, and I think it's an important part for just all humans to continue to try to develop, and especially as those who are participating in something, trying to expand the role of humanity off planet Earth.
I'm so sorry, Robert. I just had this crazy idea. It's
Yeah.
making me laugh. I'm thinking before an investor decides to invest in a company, maybe the entrepreneur should go on a Tony Robbins course for like a month.
Well,
Like a month of self-development before they're ready for the space.
I'm not going to. I don't know what an investor should or shouldn't do there, but I definitely think there's sometimes it's like you give a lot of money to someone who's maybe still. It's not even about their age. Maybe they're just their maturity level. You know, are they mature? They say like if you're if you're an honest, good person, and and then all of a sudden you're an honest person, you have a lot of money, you might stay that way. But if you're kind of a jerk and you get a lot of money, financial wealth, you kind of it can potentially just amplify that. So back to the space side, and this is just kind of maybe wishful thinking, but we hope that leadership and entrepreneurs not think about like the day-to-day stuff with the business, but like how do they sort of set good examples for their teams, their staff, and part of that I think is just making sure you're trying to increase your emotional abilities, or your emotional intelligence.
Your emotional intelligence, your psychological awareness of yourself and of other people, of your environment, and your empathy. A lot of people lack empathy, especially if they're very technically focused or if they're just business focused. The humanities often disregarded. It's ignored.
Yeah, and it sort of shares that probably at the end of one's life, I'm gonna guess that it's not like the person is, or their loved ones are thinking so much about all of their business accomplishments or their other academic accomplishments, but probably who they are and were as a person, as a human. How did they interact with other people, and how did they treat other people? And I think that sometimes does get missed in the it's fun to be competitive, it's fun to race, and that's how we are, but I think it's also, we have to take awareness that in some ways it's kind of like it's also like it's also not a big deal. It's almost maybe more important, like the humanity. The other stuff is actually probably a little more important.
So what kind of people do you deal with, or do you like working with in the space world?
I love working with assholes. That's the only type of only jerks, liars, thieves. That is very far from the truth. No, I definitely have a filter and try to screen for that. Occasionally, someone will pass through that, but I try to take proper course of action. But I enjoy working with people that are just kind of authentic, and can be themselves. And I mean, I've worked with some people that are probably fall in line with some very like highly focused, eccentric makers and builders. And so as long as you're kind of aware and know how you can kind of communicate well with each other and operate, I have a very diverse type of people I work with. That's one thing. I mean, I definitely have
an eclectic friendship.
Yeah, a very eclectic peers and colleagues. But for myself, I definitely try to find people who are having authenticity. I think is probably somewhere in some sort of somewhere up there.
No, it's good to be authentic.
Good trait, yes.
So I want to know about the space economy. How do you think Bitcoin and cryptocurrency will shape the space economy? And will we see the banking system on Earth expect similar changes, a similar transition?
So I'll tell you what I know. I'm not an expert on the area. I have research there. I wrote a white paper about the intersection of where geospatial data and blockchain could intersect. I co-wrote with Kartik Kumar. Um, there was some work a few years ago by Jeff Garzik regarding putting some early work on maybe putting, I think, storing some Bitcoin on satellites. It changed. He has a different project now called Space Chain, and they are it's kind of a blockchain enabled satellites. I think there's both a not-for-profit and a for-profit organizations affiliated with it. They want to be able to help democratize access to satellites, and and through their ecosystem are attempting to allow more people access to, like, to using satellites or leveraging satellites. Um, Jeff was one of the number 2 or number 3 software developers of Bitcoin, so he's highly knowledgeable in the area. He's definitely, I'd say, one of the experts on this intersection of where he believes, like, crypto and space and how potentially could democratize things. Like, you could see future things like, say, your resources in space, things like, maybe asteroid mining or lunar mining, that maybe you could use some of these types of crypto ledgers, triple ledgers, blockchain ledgers, whatever you want to describe them as, to be able to show what has been, mined or extracted. Being able to use AI to kind of have these maybe more automated buying and selling of some of those resources. Maybe you'll use some of these these space-based cryptocurrencies as eventually you have transactions taking place in space. Right now you don't. All the money's spent here on Earth, the banking's on Earth. But maybe one day we'll have in-space transactions, and there might be some type of representation of currency or money not go back to Earth. So it would be great to see where it is smart to use that technology, to use it if it's in a smart and effective use in space. I don't know about I go back and forth. I definitely vacillate on where it is on Earth. It seems like things like Bitcoin are probably here to stay, at least for the time being. But I sometimes wonder if they're just being used as a substitute for things like gold, where people are saying, okay, the dollar is getting, each year it's becoming, like, say, the US dollar, perhaps less valuable. We want to find something else. It used to be things like precious metals people would put money in, but there was, what you can do with silver or gold outside maybe some industrial uses or jewelry or sitting in a vault was limited. And I think that the cryptocurrencies have many other types of usages, and of course there's going to be continued debate. I think the debate's healthy, but I really can't comment further on, like, how we, how.
I'm going to ask you about that. So sorry, you mentioned people use gold and Bitcoin and precious metals, and they stick it in a vault and they try to make money from that. What is this process? Because I came across someone, funnily enough, from the space industry, who approached me asking for high net worth individuals who has a substantial amount of Bitcoin or gold. What is this process?
Well, I mean, it's just people, they, instead of keeping their money in a bank account where they're probably not earning any interest, or as in fact that, they have their, say, $100 in that bank account. The following year, it might not be worth in 2022 what the $100 is worth. So sometimes they will invest that money into a precious metal or cryptocurrency with the hope that that will become more valuable, but the difference between the precious metals is that for a while those things were considered very stable because cryptocurrencies didn't exist. It was just like, okay, there's only so much gold, they're only mining it so much a year. It was kind of like probably not a quickly growing investment, but it was kind of stable. And now crypto has come in, and some of it's very volatile, so it can swing up, but it can also crash. So I don't think we've yet kind of seen where some of the cryptocurrencies are just more, stable pricing. So where you kind of can predict going, okay, it's probably going to go at 2 or 3% a year, not just like kind of doing these more erratic movements in the price of the specific crypto.
Well, that's really interesting. So, okay, we spoke about the future of humanity in space and the creation of artificial gravity on habitable cities in between the Earth and the Moon. And then I
Yeah.
came across something called the ONeil Cylinder. And I wanted to know, how is the space industry preparing for something like that?
I don't know if it's preparing. I mean, there's been talk about this for decades about how you would have in space habitats for humans, and you could these cylinders would rotate, and they could have simulated day and simulated nighttime. They would have artificial gravity. Um, we've never built something that large yet, and um, there's still a lot more theoretical. But again, perhaps with some of this transportation infrastructure being put in place, we might be able to do that within our lifetimes, is build some of these artificial gravity platforms. And some say, well, why artificial gravity? You're going to space. They said, well, all this 3D space, all this infinite 3D space out in the solar system. Why? And if we're running out of some room here of terms of hospitable, pleasant, resource-deprived places here on Earth, you could build these large structures using materials from the moon, materials from the asteroids, and you need to make it one gravity to make it similar to Earth, because the microgravity environment is not healthy for humans. I mean, right now, the astronaut crew on the International Space Station have to exercise like 2 hours a day. Think about, like, say you have a productive time of 8 hours, 8 hours, and 2 hours of it's exercising. And they have to do that just to, and I don't even know if they're keeping a borderline status quo, but they have to do this. So I think we're probably going to need artificial gravity if we're going to want larger sets of groups, because people just aren't going to follow 2 hours of exercise a day. It's highly unlikely. And we don't know if a fetus can come full term in anything less than 1G. We don't know that yet, and that's a big question. Because if the answer is that the human fetus requires 1 Earth gravity, no more, no less, that's going to cause. I mean, that's a big. I mean, then you can't have. You can have people living on space, but then they have to come back to Earth to have their children, and then bring them back to Mars or Moon or the asteroids. So I think artificial gravity is probably going to be a necessary. Seems to be that it'll probably become a necessary component. There's a group that Dr. Gerard K. O'Neill started called the Space Studies Institute. It's still around, and they have one of their projects. It's unfortunately unfunded, is around doing a smaller scale artificial gravity structure. And it seems like somebody, some benefactor really ought to come up. They're calling it the SSIG lab, the On-Orbit Gravity Laboratory. And it seems like, some government agency, maybe with some benefactors, really ought to look at, establishing that, so that we can find out the challenges of working in different gravities, because this would be a platform you could change some of the gravities with, and it would be a little bit larger, so you can start getting some, first get some mammal studies on there before somebody just says, oh, we're going to go from 0 to building a facility for 500 or 1,000 people. We probably have to start with some smaller steps.
It's really interesting. I came across a company who are planning to create the first baby in space. And I think they've selected some potential candidates.
Wait, the first baby in space? So that is the business, that they're going to have a baby in space?
Not the business. I think it's I can't remember if it was an organization, a scientific organization of some sort. But they wanted to prepare for a colony in space, and they wanted to prepare for babies, for creating babies in microgravity.
Hmm.
I can't remember the name of the company, but actually the guy got in touch with me because he watched one of my episodes, Sex and Space, by Dr. Simon Dubay, who stresses the importance of space agencies needing to facilitate the discussion about sex in space and colonizing other planets and preparing for, pregnancy and giving birth in space, because it seems very impractical if we're going to become an interplanetary species, like you said, to just give birth on Earth and then go
Yeah.
to the moon or Mars. So I think we need to think about these things and we need to prepare for these things. So I'd love to know if you know any organizations or companies or scientists who are working to answer these questions.
No, no. I mean, I've just heard it kind of talked about anecdotally or speculative or in a speculative manner, but as far as I know, yeah, government agencies aren't really studying this, and probably in their mind that this is an issue much further out. That this is that in their minds there will only still be low numbers of humans in space. But what they're forgetting is that once some of these new launch systems come online, and as we're able to take up larger amounts of people and have destinations for them, um, we might want to more to put to task some people to be really studying this further regarding mammalian reproduction.
We have about 3 billion people on the planet who are without connectivity, without the internet. And I came across this paragraph in your book, actually. So I wanted to know, will space be responsible for providing connectivity to the last 3 billion people on the Earth who don't have it? And if so, how will this change humanity as we know it today?
Well, it's going to have that second order effect where giving people connectivity who've not yet had it before, whether it's just through telephone, text, the web tools, and learning. If you're talking about being able to get large numbers of people who didn't have this access, and now they have this, it's going to be able to afford them to do so many new things. If it's connecting with family members in an easier way, starting businesses, making it business transactions, helping facilitate that, potentially bringing maybe many people out of poverty to a higher standard of living, just with like, I think, with better access of communication, and maybe more understanding of other people around the planet, when we're all when we're connecting more with people in some of these other more remote parts, or people are less connected, digitally connected parts of the planet, and they join us. We can again see how both similar we all are in terms of as a species. So I do think that there really could be this second order effects of having of kind of things that we won't imagine in terms of all the benefits it's going to bring to these people that are not yet connected.
Well, how can that in turn benefit us? Because right now there's definitely a social divide globally. But if those people were elevated, what would life look like for all of us?
Um, I don't really know, but I guess, maybe we'll be able to have more friends in some of these other places. Maybe you'll be more inclined to communicate or do business or do projects or work with and partner with people in these other parts. Because right now, it's pretty common, connecting with people who have other digital connectivity. Whether I had conversations with people over North America, maybe the Philippines, parts of Europe, but then there's other parts of the world that maybe I don't have as many contacts or acquaintances residently, because I'm just not able. It's just not as easy to communicate with those people. They don't have maybe just some of the same infrastructure that I get to, have very privileged to have access to. So I don't really know how it'll affect me personally, but I do think that I think there is only a benefit when there is more transparency
Mm.
and distribution of especially communications resources um, around the planet.
So if you could get in touch with um, people from a remote part of the world and work with them on a space venture, where would it be, and what would you like to develop?
Um, I mean, I don't know because I probably wouldn't. That's an interesting question. I probably wouldn't first start about just like doing business with them, but I would want to get to know who they are and what their interests are and what are the things that they're amazing at and what are things that just trying to find like where are the points of interest, where are the points of like, hey, this is where we can be complementary, kind of where we have complementary skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
But I would first probably want to understand who they are and like, how they kind of operate, just how do they live before, just
Is
jumping
there
into
a
something
remote
that
part of
seems.
the world that you have your sights set on that you're?
Uh, no, not
No.
not really at the moment. But I have some. Um, I'll say we have a business interests where the things will like hopefully will benefit people from for different parts, larger parts of the planet, and always want to find people who have access to technology or communications technology will be able to find out more about what's. I think there's just going to be more transparency. I think that's what it'll hopefully allows. And it's interesting where some countries are always trying to now set up their own version of the internet, so they put firewalls on their people because they think that it's that there's certain communications philosophies, writings, videos are are going to cause trouble. And I think it's sort of ultimately up to humans to kind of like make their own decisions and be their own filters. Because I think ultimately kind of truth does kind of, will kind of, you know, will prevail. Or people want, I think people do want more freedom. That's what I'll
I think everyone
reprise
wants
it.
freedom.
Yeah,
Um,
people want more more, freedom of choice, freedom of time. Um, and I think if one has more communications tools, I think that can be an um, enabling factor.
and I'm interested to know people within developing nations and their space endeavors. Like, how do they compare to? Well, obviously the US is like a giant in the space industry, but are they being recognized? Are there efforts to include them more in future space ventures?
Yeah, I mean, they have. I mean, I'll just share. There's this new platform, this Clubhouse app, and there's even now some clubs that are talking about that are just solely focused on bringing conversations and facilitating conversations regarding some of these emerging countries or countries that have sometimes they have some tremendous talent, but they don't have like the national budgets to kind of like support their own indigenous launch infrastructure. But people are smart and creative, and they're finding ways to collaborate with people in other countries, or there's these kind of like clubs or consortiums. So I have seen movements and there's discussions. I think if one actually just looks online, you can almost find like regional groups for space. Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. It's just that don't expect like large space budgets like maybe what is you might see in Europe or the United States. But they are finding, there are. I think we will see those areas emerge with their own specialties, and their own foci.
Awesome. So in the book you mentioned space will be a $1 trillion industry, and a $250 industry in the future. So why is now the best time to invest in space and prepare humanity for the new space age?
Well, I think there will always be time. There's always going to be deals and opportunities. So I don't think for somebody who feels like the fear of missing out, don't stress about that. There's always going to be opportunities to get in. But I think it's just right now is a very intriguing time there's because there's just so much kind of, it's like a lot of things haven't been done yet. So it's like it's not just about doing things on the first sakes for the sake of being first, but it's this real opportunity to if one wants to create some things that are fundamental for the rest of the industry, or the base layer that we're going to build upon. This is kind of the this is kind of like the opportunity, and then from that, ground base, then we're going to start seeing applications developed on top of that. I think this industry will be multi-generational. It'll be evergreen. I think it could be one of the dominant ones of the 21st century and beyond. It's just starting. It'll have to perform quite well to get to that kind of the $1 trillion area. But when I extend even further and say it's got the possibility of quadrillions, it's the only sector that can kind of do it when you start taking in the scale and vastness of like space and our solar system. Humanity's never done anything on that sort of scale before, but space is an enabling domain that could allow this. But
and be very rewarding in terms of return on investment. ROII. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I call the ROIII. It's like return on investment, innovation, and imagine. Sometimes I say inspiration,
Yeah.
and I've also sometimes I've said imagination, but it's basically inspiration, because like space is just like an investor puts in $1 to hopefully get $1 plus a little more back. When you invest in space, you're also investing area that's an innovative area. And as I referred to earlier about the Apollo program still providing dividends. And there's been a bunch of different studies when people try to say, okay, is NASA, what's the return? And there's some different things. It's difficult to quantify. But I think there was like an area saying, for $1 that was put in by NASA, like it generates $8 to $9 back. And then space is just kind of a cool thing. It's like, kids and adults alike tend to always think space is kind of cool, whether or not they want to go there. We live under the sky, we look up the sky at night. It provides this amazing inspiration. Space is still a very popular theme in terms of our kind of culture that we create, in terms of entertainment. And then extension of that, like science fiction, space is usually a very popular thing to include. And some of the most popular films to date have been around with the space theme. So
what inspired you to get involved with the space industry?
It was, I think I was always a fan of space. I grew up in the state of Florida, but then I kind of realized that I probably have what it took to become like an astronaut in that time.
Oh, cool.
And I went off to do other things. And then it was when I heard about the X Prize, I realized this is something where maybe this might do something. It might be, and it ultimately was, I think, a catalyst for a lot of new activity. And for me personally, after going to the pre-competition flight of Spaceship One, I recognized that this could be like, it was like a symbol for me. I mean, it might not have meant anything, but my personal interpretation of that event was, Robert, if there was an area to jump in on, this is it. and it kind of hit a lot of check boxes. Now, at the time, it was still very early. So, there wasn't much activity, was relatively infrequent, but that was okay. I had more patience then.
What were you working on at the time? What was the very first venture you built?
I was working with a an investment fund, and I was working in commercial real estate, and the very first thing I did was around a newspaper acquisition, and we acquired this community newspaper, and we and it was, I would say, it was, yeah, it was kind of okay, a little bit struggling, but we turned it around, and we really increased the circulation and the quality of it, and it was a lot of fun in a lot of ways. And then we sold it about a year and a half later.
And there's something that reminds me, something that really struck me in your book, and I found it quite amusing actually. You called it the founder's syndrome. Can you tell me more about
Um, just in terms of how to deal with it.
yeah,
Well,
what it is and how to
well,
deal with it, and not to become.
so so in the book, if it was talking about a specific company that had failed, and actually it was an investor in it, and the concept is that where one of the founders or founders might be resistant to kind of some change, and sometimes it's like you have like maybe your advisors, you're not listening to them, or consultants, and anybody can give advice, but if you don't take the good stuff and use it, you can be at your own detriment. So so what I would suggest, I mean, it's just my experience, is that it is, helpful to listen, to hear all sorts of sides, and sometimes you do get just erroneous information, and don't on the poor information, but learn to be discerning and have filters, and understand the world has a lot of gray. It's not just black and white. And as a founder, recognize you're always learning, and sometimes you have to make sometimes you have to make a decision, and the decision might not even be the right one, but you have to make a decision. Sometimes I've seen companies, just from the lack of making a decisions, adversely affecting them. So you try to get the data where you can, talk to whoever you can to learn more. But I think at some point, making a decisive decision is a good leadership skill.
How do founders and entrepreneurs, how can they tackle their own egos?
Uh, I don't know, a million and one things. Go to they can go to psychotherapists and go through therapy. They can, there's plenty of literature and books and blogs.
Anything you recommend for them?
You can meditate. You can go work at I don't know, go work at a homeless shelter or an animal shelter. I think there's many activities. Find out what resonates with you in terms to how to add some grounding to one's life. Wash some
why
dishes.
Is that important? Why is that grounding important?
Because all humans we're still kind of the same, even if we might think there's subtle cultural differences, or where we grew up, or how we were educated, or how we're clothed, or what neighborhood we grew in, or those are subtle differences, but at our core we're pretty much mostly the same. And at the end of our lives we will mostly be the same. And most of our lives, as somebody said, like, I know how you will die, and said it will be with an exhale. And on that last breath, that we all take, it's, we should just recognize, we all came into the world the same way, and we all leave the world the same, essentially, most of the time, the same way.
No, that's beautiful. No, I've always wanted to ask that question for an interview, because I was thinking, you're right, you do get a lot of people who are very different. You get people who are grounded, then you get people who are quite up in their head. And it's quite important within business, and just for humanity in general, to learn the empathy and to be grounded, so that their decision making and everything that they do, like I said earlier, will be coming from a very healthy place. To have that self-awareness, to evolve constantly, to learn from your mistakes. and from those around you who are experts or more knowledgeable than you, and embrace that. Okay,
Yeah,
and our last question.
sure.
So I know, like myself, you're a massive cat fan, and you have two cats, Lakshmi and Luna, who are probably behind you right now.
No, I can't. I think actually they are not in there. I closed the office, and thankfully they're not scratching at the door. Usually they if they know that I'm in here and if they're awake, they'll just start like not scratching at the door for me to let them in.
Oh gosh, and I love your relationship with your cats. It's just so beautiful. And that's what, for me, that's one of the things that really stood out about your personality, you know, your absolute adoration of the feline species, and then your cats. Then it inspired this question. So what does the future of space tourism look like? And will you be able to take your cats with you?
Um, the future. So I think so. Space tourism is actually already happening in different ways. You can go to a museum and go to science and space exhibits. That's a form of space tourism. You can visit some spaceports, active and inactive. Um, you can go on parabolic flights. There's a few different vendors out there, different costs to experience what microgravity feels like. There are things like space camps for adults and children. I know there's one in Southern California called Astro Camp. I think it's for both parents and kids. It's like a 2-week thing. There's US Space Camp. There's probably programs in other countries. It's almost a form of space tourism. There's a company called Space VR, which is uh, giving people a simulated spacewalk and other experiences through the combination of flotation tanks and virtual reality. That could be a form. There's a very still small market for in-space tourism. Really, only a few individuals have paid their own way to go to space, and that will start to increase. I think the U.S. government is making space tourists, like when they have to sign a waiver if they're flying with like a suborbital provider or something. They have to sign a waiver, and they're not called tourism. They call them space participants. A very neutral sounding word, not so much fun. But I do think that over the coming years, as access to space decreases, we'll have things like satellites with virtual reality cameras. Space VR is working on that, so you can have this very, very immersive and more live view of the space environment. People visiting space for sometimes minutes up to hours and days. That will become an increased experience for people, because right now we're still on Spaceship Earth, which is like the best spaceship that we know of in the universe. And we should take really good care of it, and we should do a better job to try to repair and make amends with it and be a better passenger on Spaceship Earth. But I think it will be a great experience for those to be able to step periodically for as little or as long as they want to, but people to have the choice to say, hey, I want to be able to go out there and just get this experience. Some people might go for a day who are saying, hey, this is cool, beautiful view, but I'd rather be back on Earth. And I think I think being able, our civilization, be able to give that choice to as many people as possible is a really beautiful one. I don't know when yet we'll be able to take some of our other furry members of the family, dogs and cats or birds, to space. We'll have to first of all think about, like, I think you have to get them there safely, because I imagine that it could be kind of stressful to get them there. Don't think they would be particularly happy in microgravity. There are some videos of cats in parabolic flights. They don't look particularly pleased. So, let's just say we could get an animal there to a place safely. I think it would be more commonplace when we have artificial gravity. That would be because people are going to want to have like having some other furry members of their family around with them. But I just think about like getting them there safely.
Be interesting
for
to
relatively low stress.
Cats and dogs on Mars, or will they turn into another type of species because of the gravity in the environment and the atmosphere there, and how that would affect them? And
yeah, I mean, maybe speciation could occur more quickly in space, because some radiation effects. So I don't know. I know, um, I think that that has been talked about, like how can new species potentially emerge quicker by taking them off Earth, if they're able to, spawn and have multiple, future generations and procreate.
Hmm. Interesting things to think about. Thank you so much, Robert. That's been exciting. I know you've got a meeting to get ready for. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It was super fun sharing with you today. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.